Hello everyone, this is Alex from MenuDocs, and in today's episode, we're going to be getting back into our Introduction to Web Development series. In today's episode, we're going to be playing purely with the CSS, and we're going to be working on margins, some padding, and some floats. But guys, before we can get into today's episode here on the MenuDocs, make sure to check out our partner, Oxide Hosting.
Today's video is proudly powered by our partner, Oxide Hosting. Get your products hosted by them with their cheap, reliable services. So what are you waiting for? Check them out in the description below.
Alright guys, so I would like to warn you before we get into this episode. This episode is shorter. This is a quick disclaimer for all of you that assume that all of my episodes are going to be 10 to more minutes. I'm afraid today's episode is going to be considerably shorter. In today's episode, we're going to be looking purely at just margins and floats. Because of this, the episode is only going to be anywhere from 6 to 8 minutes. I really do not have a ton of time personally to make this episode include the padding, which means padding is going to come in our cleanup episode 1. Make sure you all check that out when it comes along down the line. But for now, let's get into the video. Alright guys, so this episode we're going to be talking purely about margins and floats. Now, margins have a lot of usability. There's a lot of things you can do with margins, of course. And to show this off, I'm going to be having a constant flipping back and forth between our actual CSS and our current page. So this is our page right now. We're going to be changing this so the heading is up top here in just a little bit. So let's get started, shall we? To do this, well, we actually need to start with some margins. So there are 4 types of margins: top, bottom, left, and right. And each margin takes in a pixel value. So for this one, we're going to do margin top. That way it's put at the top. And we're going to do 10 pixels. Actually, nope, that's max resolution. Whoops. Margin top. What is wrong with you today? Okay, that works. And if we go here and reload our page, of course, you'll notice that it has this gap here. Now, for ease of showing you all margins, for this episode, I'm actually going to go into the index, and I'm going to comment out our 2 images. And the pure reason behind this is because we're going to show some marginal differences, of course. So because we're using an H2, if I set this to, say, 50 pixels, went to our web page, refreshed, it has a much bigger space now. The most common use that I've had for margins on the top, especially for your title heading, is 10 pixels because that's some space, but it's also not too much, especially for nav bars. So there's also the margin left. There's also the margin right. Margin right is typically for you aligning things to the right of the page. So if you have your text aligned to the right, which I can show here in a minute, you can do that. But for now, let's do a margin left on our paragraph. Let's do 55 pixels to show off a rather dramatic change. And there we go. Look at that. So let's quickly show off the margin right, which means we need to do a text align. I can't spell today. Right. There we go. And if we refresh the page now, we have the same margin, just it's on the right side of the page. And that's pretty neat, because that means you can also do margins off the bottom. If you have like a footer and you want to put the margin off of the bottom section of the footer, you could do that. And we'll get into using margins and things more in the cleanup episodes where we start to actually make the website look somewhat decent. But Now we're actually going to talk about the images. As you notice, the images right now, if I save and reload the page up here, they're at the top, and that's not good. We want them to be in the middle, right? So to do this, we actually have to move the images. HTML is called markup. It's the hypertext markup language. We're going to put it under the list, which means you need to put things where you want them. So look, the list and heading is here because in the code, if we go to it, the list, item, and the heading are both above the image. Now, if you want to make elements appear above and below, you just have to put them in the right order. So like if I randomly wanted to say move my button, I want to put my button up here. Now, I could do that. I just have to put the button above the two images, and there it is. And it still works exactly the same. It's just above. It's kind of awesome. So, now let's talk about floating. The only way to move images drastically is not with alignment. It's with floating. And it's really easy to float images. So since we defined our images with the img tag, because that's the image tag, we just do image float, and we give it left, right, none, or inherit. Inherit we will talk about again in the cleanup things. We're going to talk about a lot of the things in this episode here when we're doing our cleanup to actually make the website look good. Now if we refresh the page, notice the images are now in line with all the documents, and they're floated to the right of the page. But since they're floating, they're going to appear in line with the rest of the text. And an easy way to fix this is to go here to the images and just add another break. And that should move things, but sometimes it doesn't. A lot of the time, because you're floating it, it's going to float in line with your text, which if you don't want that, you can always just do we can just align items to the left here. Ignore what that is. That's a Microsoft add-on that just says Microsoft items should be aligned. And then if we move that, all of this text and stuff here should be moved to this side, and the images should still be over here. And guys, I'm really sorry, but that's about it for today's episode. I didn't really have much to cover in today's episode. We're just talking about floats and margins. Next episode is going to be a little bit longer because we're going to get into another more complicated topic, but in that episode it's going to be a lot more entertaining. So if you all enjoyed today's episode here on the MenuDocs, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, guys. And make sure to join our Discord. Our Discord is linked below, and you can get help with any of your code, even if we don't have a tutorial series on it. So guys, that's it for today's episode. As always, happy coding.